Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about what I see as the continued inadequacy of policing around the BLM-Antifia riots or protests, call it what you like, but where they brazenly and blatantly interfere with law enforcement, particularly in relation to detention and deportation of criminal legal aliens in the United States. Now, it appears to me that these groups and again, I mean, protesters is probably a bit of a stretch to call them that. It's close to rioters or insurrectionists, I would argue, given they're directly interfering with legal, on the books laws, law enforcement action. Then I would view that as anarchy, insurrection. But how they're able to get away with it, or largely get away with it, maybe it's because they're largely peaceful. But there's one I was looking at, came into my feed on YouTube, and it was around 24 hours where the insurrectionists, the anarchists, were operating sort of in shifts around the clock. Now, it's very difficult to get people out on a cold night, at midnight, to go and man the. It's not an easy gig. So clearly they're being paid, organised, and supported. There's, people bringing around hot cups of coffee and, hot food, and there's all sorts of organising and infrastructure that's being applied here. So clearly it's not grassroots, far from it. But only the most brazen interference with law enforcement seems to result in an arrest. So there was one I was watching, an anarchist kept walking backwards into the police officers and bumping into them, pushing them, shoving them. And you could see that the police were warning this guy several times not to do it, but he kept on doing it. And only then, after, it must have been the 10th warning, that only then did he get arrested. And of course, he's screaming, "Help, help, I haven't done anything. What are you doing? I don't know, I've done nothing." And the usual playbook here. And as far as I know, there are over 100 of these anarchists working in shifts. Again, they're all paid to be there and supported with extensive infrastructure. But they're so they got two were arrested, and as I understand it, they were arrested for creating a public nuisance and so on. They could have thrown the book at these people, and they were blocking the streets. They were resisting arrest, doing a whole lot of things. They could have really chalked up some decent charges. Instead, they just gave them some low-level misdemeanor. Why would they do that? Now, we can look at the wider issue here with this deporting of illegal aliens, where there's federal authorities on one side, such as ICE and those sort of guys, and then there's the local authorities, the local police in various cities. Now, the behaviour of the police in various cities varies depending on the political persuasion of the local mayor or the state governor or the local police chief and so on. Now, some of these places, particularly in the very Democrat areas, they think that deportation of illegal aliens that have committed multiple crimes is somehow morally wrong, and or they say that's the reason, and so they refuse to assist, participate, or cooperate with lawful federal authorities, and they instigate and I think gin up the opposition to this, and I would they are indirectly through NGO funding supplying the funding or part of it that pays for the infrastructure and pays for these people to be on the street. And you'd think the federal government and the Justice Department would be far more aggressive in pursuing that, at least far more aggressive than they are. But coming to the issue of how many people getting arrested, there have been some serious affrays, violent affrays, and there have been a decent number of arrests in those instances where the mob There are some where the mob's told to move back and they get sprayed with pepper spray or something like that, mace or something, and then they back off a bit. But all in all, the arresting of these people that are the whole bunch of them will stand in front of a nice vehicle, for example, not allow it to go in or out of the compound, the illegal alien compound, and these people should all be arrested. But there always seem to be not enough officers to do it. Now, I don't get that because the authorities know exactly how many protesters are there or how many anarchists are there, and they know, with reasonable certainty that they'll engage in, at the very least, some sort of passive obstruction type behaviour, blocking the street, blocking the movement of the vehicle, that sort of stuff. Or we'll go into outright violent confrontation of pushing and shoving the officers and kicking them or whatever the case may be. Why are there never, or rarely anyway, but never, but why are there rarely not enough officers to deal with that? I mean, if I'm organising this, and who am I? I'm just some stupid bum here. But if I'm organising the movement of illegals in and out of an area, and I know there's 200 Bolshe type anarchists there outside, I make sure I would mobilise enough officers to make a number of arrests. So the number of arrests that are made on these mobs is very small as far as I can tell in the overall scheme of things. But then what happens to them? I've made an effort to look at when they've put a name up that Billy Bob got arrested here or there and to try and it's not that easy. What happens to these people? Why is there not good news coverage and follow up on this? Billy Bob got arrested for having a punch up with a law enforcement officer, clearly breaking the law, obstructing, the assaulting, and so on and so forth. So there's some serious offences here that you'd think at the very least would get a prison term of some sort. Now, these people, the ones I have been able to find out about, are not getting prison terms. Now, this could be because the local prosecutors maybe don't want to, or an activist judge has found, which these people can do with astonishing reliability. They can find an activist judge to hear the case with case dismissed. Or they'll get a small fine or a small community service. I mean, some of these people are getting 50 hours community service. That's it. Now, that community service will be with a very leftist-leaning NGO type organisation that maybe where they don't even have to turn up, but just get signed off on it, so they can just go straight back on the street. Sometimes there's a fine, not a very big one, but the NGO that's paying them pays that fine. If they have to go to court and there's a number of charges, then they get a free lawyer paid by the NGO. So there's no downside for these people. The lawyer is free. If there's a fine, the fine's paid. If there's community service, then there's 9 times out of 10, it's going to be with a sympathetic leftist group just going to sign off the form saying, yeah, you've done your 50 hours. And they never did a single minute of community service. So they're just walking straight back on the street with impunity and suffering no penalty. And the activist judge will say, no, we won't record this. No, we don't record. Hey, you're doing good work. You get out there and do some more of it. As you see, by the way, with climate activists in Australia, with astonishing reliability, activist judges somehow are allocated to hear the case where some sort of climate activist has brought the whole city to a standstill, and gets all their legal fees, travel fees, everything is paid for by the NGO, and without recording any recording of a legal violation. So there's no disincentive. They're not suffering any penalty. So until these people are suffering penalties, now once you talk about prison time, then it's different. That's a whole new ball game. Very few people want to go to prison. And if they've got no downside with legal fee, just an ordinary citizen, if they get caught up with, fighting with city hall, as it were, and they've got to hire lawyers, they've got to take time off work, they've got to pay the legal fees, they've got to pay the fine, they've got to go through all that. That is a huge shit fight and very expensive. They don't want to do that. But these people, and so it's a disincentive to break the law. You don't want to get into trouble. You don't, the process itself is going to beat you up badly. But with these people who have no, boss who said, hey, if you break the law and you can't come to work, you're out of a job, buddy. They don't have any of those concerns. They don't have to meet any costs or anything at all. Lawyers are all covered. So they're quite inclined to continue doing so. And still, until prison terms are being put out there, then I don't think there's any disincentive for these people. And if you look at the huge turnouts that they're getting at these anarchist type gatherings, then clearly they're not concerned. They're not frightened. They're with one little tiny bit of being arrested or thrown in prison. And if they were, then you would find very few, if any, would turn up. So until that disincentive is widely put in the just I was looking at another anarchist thing, and I reckon out of the there was probably 60 to 70 people all up. 30 of them could have been arrested, easily been arrested. And once you start arresting 30 people and they all go to prison, then the others go, ooh, I don't want to do that. I'm happy to turn up and do this and that, provided there's no consequences. But hey, I don't want to have to get involved. I don't want to have to go to prison. No, that's a line too far for me. But until you get to that, and until the money and the funding is cut off, then these sort of things are going to continue. And I think it's bad optics for any administration to constantly have these mobs outside, because it gives the impression that something you're doing is not really legitimate. And now I know that's not the case, but it gives that vibe off and gives those optics off. These grassroots people, citizens, vitally concerned about something outrageous. That's the image they're getting across, and doing it with some success, not complete success, but some success. So there needs to be a serious clampdown, and these people need to be put the fuck in prison. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.